And now, welcome to the Patriot Pulse podcast.
I love that Air Force Band rendition of the national anthem. Good morning, everybody. It is the 21st of January. This is episode 242 of the Patriot Pulse podcast. And I remind everybody, we're also simulcasting to Two Guys Drinking Coffee. We're also live to X, to Rumble, Kick, and Twitch, and YouTube. So good morning. I'm glad to see people on, and good morning to our guest, Jim Machuga. I'll give a little intro here in a minute, but it was kind of funny. We got into a discussion. Jim popped on early, and we got into a discussion, and I looked down at the time on the computer here, and I said, "Oh crap! It's 2 minutes after 9." We were late getting on. So for anybody that was looking for us right at 9 o'clock, apologize for being a couple minutes late coming on. But as most of you probably know, if you've been with us for any amount of time, that since this is the third Wednesday of the month, it's time for Econ Recon with Jim M. And before I bring him on, I'm just going to do my housekeeping. Click like, click share. Help us. I mean, talking with Chris Valek and Jody Ledgerwood over the weekend, had dinner with them on Saturday. Great time, too. If they're watching this, I'll give them a shout out. But they were saying they can't find us organically. They got to go searching for us. So the shadow banning is still alive and well, but help us overcome that by clicking like and share. And if you are watching us on Rumble or X, just subscribe to our channel, and that'll help us. That will help us overcome the algorithms that are still to this day censoring us. Mm-hmm. So before we get started, I want just a little word from our sponsor.
Need to get your brand noticed, remembered, and loved? At Everything Printed Promo, we turn your logo into walking, talking, shareable billboards. Whatever the occasion, we make you look amazing every time. Pens, shirts, drinkware, tech gadgets, you dream it, we print it perfectly. Visit everythingprintedpromo.com or call 888-619-9286 today. First-time customers get 15% off. Let's make your brand unforgettable.
Okay. Thank you to Everything Printed for sponsoring this podcast. Appreciate that. But now, as you can see on the screen here, we got Jim M. And as we have done for quite some time now, even after Jim decided to leave the podcast, we wanted to get him back because he is, in my book, or at least my estimation, so much more well-versed in the economy. I mean, that was what his degree was in, and we just appreciate his insight. So we call it now, the third Wednesday a month, we call it Econ Recon, and we bring Jim back to talk about all things economics and money. I also want to mention, give you a little shout out, Jim also hosts a weekly local meeting called Discerning the Times, and he also does this via Zoom, as I understand it, where he looks at current events and ties it into a biblical perspective. But and as a matter of fact, when I'm prepping for this episode, I go to Discerning the Times, his Facebook page, and pull some economic news off there to help me prepare. So, without further ado, I will say good morning to you, Jim, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, good morning to everyone out there as well. And a regular at Two Guys gave me this mug, I don't know, probably about 2 years ago. It's got the little dollar on it. Actually, it's a big dollar. It's a big mug. And so I figured, since it's economics, it's a good mug to have here.
There you go. Very good. I just have my LL Bean mug because my Two Guys Drinking Coffee was already used. It was in the dishwasher. Anyways, I want to jump right into it, though, because there are a lot of things going on. But one of the things that it's like the turd that just won't flush. Okay. the Federal Reserve, we've got even like the John Birch Society is doing a push, end the Fed. We got James Roguski, our friend out in California, is a big proponent for end the Fed. And since we've got the current Fed chair his term is going to be up on May 15th of this year, I thought it would be a good idea to at least talk about the Federal Reserve again, refresh our memories about, we've talked about the Fed since we started this podcast 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago now. But let's talk about that. And one of the things, Jim, and one of the reasons we were late getting out, we got into a real good discussion on this, and Jim told me something that I didn't know. But I just want to say, I was under the impression, and I'm setting this up for you, Jim, so you can correct me, okay? I was under the impression that since the Federal Reserve was, and I call it invented by the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, that it would take another act of Congress to get us out of, or to end the Federal Reserve, or get us out of it, whatever you want to say. But as I found out this morning in our pre-podcast chat, that's not necessarily the case. You want to enlighten us on that, Jim?
Okay, so let's go back in history for maybe some listeners that don't know a whole lot about the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve got started in 1913 by an act of Congress that kind of was slipped in there around Christmas, New Year's. I think it was Christmas Eve, actually. Mm-hmm. And got slipped in when nobody was paying attention, like so oftentimes happens. The best news cycle to watch, by the way, is like around Friday evening. That's when you get all the news in this country, right after the markets close and no one's paying any attention. But anyhow, so they put the Fed in place, and that totally was unconstitutional. Okay, so the Constitution of the United States says that only Congress has the power to mint money, and that money needs to be gold and silver. So the Federal Reserve is essentially a private bank, very mysterious as to exactly who owns it, but it apparently is owned by the biggest banks in this country, which is kind of interesting. So it got started through a little bit of a crisis, quote unquote, a crisis, because everything always happens during a crisis. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And the bankers, the JP Morgan, Chases, and so forth, they all got together and said, well, the government needs to have a regulatory agency, a central bank, to monitor all this stuff. But they're the ones that actually created it and owned it. So it's kind of like having the fox in charge of the chicken coop, So the Federal Reserve is based on debt. It's a debt-based system. You print money out of nothing. We've talked about that for so long at this point. It continues to go on. In fact, it was just ramped up in December. So we're printing more money now than we were 3 months ago, and it's continuing. So what our Constitution says is money needs to be asset-backed, in particular by gold and silver, which is biblical, constitutional, one could argue ethical, historical, etc., financial, economic, whatever you want to call it. The Federal Reserve is debt-based. So if we really are serious about ending the Fed, if we had our representatives, and I'm not sure, there are so-called representatives, and that goes from the Democrats, the Republicans, the Senate, the Congress, the White House, and the judicial system, okay? If they were constitutional, they could end the Fed tomorrow simply by saying the Federal Reserve is unconstitutional. It's right, and it's right there in the Constitution. It's very straight. It's very clear. However, that no one has chosen to go that route. So our good friend Greg Mannarino has mentioned the Banking Act of 1934, where in there the option to back our currency with gold again is there. And we could simply sign on the dotted line that is what we wish to do. It would take 7 seconds, according to Greg at least, because I don't know. I guess maybe you could use an auto pen, but I'd prefer just somebody actually signs it. And then our currency would then be backed by gold. Since the Federal Reserve has no gold, they would then instantly become meaningless because they can't do anything. And then the gold in Fort Knox would once again become money. And we would totally eliminate the Fed, would go back to the Constitution. And Jim, you start bringing this up, and people say, well, there's not enough gold out there to back all the money that's been printed. Yes, there is. You just revalue the price of gold. So gold, instead of being $4,700 an ounce, it becomes maybe $50,000 an ounce, like it's probably should be. And so then we would become constitutional. Our money would be backed by sound money again. The Federal Reserve would go away. It would take 7 seconds. But no one is interested in doing that, because to do that, most Americans don't own any gold, so they will become much, much poorer. And so nobody, for as much as people talk about we want the Constitution, when it comes down to there'll be pain involved, people step back from it.
Well, let me ask you this, because you just said something here that I don't quite understand. I want you to explain it in a little bit more detail. So you said that the people's money, if they don't have gold, that paper money would make them a lot poorer. But if we revalued gold to back all the paper money that was in circulation, or the value thereof, in other words, in stocks and bonds and whatever other investment tools that you have, if we revalued gold to cover the total liquidity of the US dollar, wouldn't that, it wouldn't devalue the dollar, it would just make it backed by something. So if I had, if I had in my retirement account $2 million and it was all of a sudden backed by gold, wouldn't I still have $2 million worth of retirement?
Absolutely.
I don't understand.
You would. But Jim, the average American doesn't have any savings. So they would have nothing. And then the ability of the federal government to cover up this problem has been to print money. Okay. So to pay people's Social Security checks, to pay people's, if you're, say you got a government handout of some kind, welfare or whatever, those dollars could no longer be printed into existence. And then that would cause people, like if you had $50,000 in the bank, you got yourself an ounce of gold. If you don't, then you don't have that gold. And since now the grocery store is going to require money that is backed by gold, since you don't have any and the federal government can no longer print the money, you're destitute.
Okay.
So are you saying that if they changed it back to gold, the Social Security that people put money into that account would be worthless, is what you're saying?
Well, no. So with Social Security, so we have, say we printed $100 out there, for simple numbers. Okay. And so we had, I don't know, I'm trying to make up 10 ounces of gold. So each gold piece would be worth $10. Okay. So we have $10 or 10 pieces of gold in the economy worth $100 total. That's our entire economy. That's what we have today. Now for the government to print a Social Security check going forward, they're going to have to back up by gold.
Right.
So they're going to have to find more gold to do that. If they don't have the gold, they can't issue the Social Security check.
Right. I see what you're saying.
That's the way it's supposed to be.
I can see why. That's what I was saying. So then, therefore, if we were making the amount of money that we currently have on hand equal the amount of gold that we have, you would think that they would have enough to cover. There's no way to cover everybody's retirement either.
Well, let's think about the federal government. First off, that would be backing the money that we currently have in existence,
right?
Not new
That's
money.
what I'm saying.
Okay, not new money. So all the money, if you got in your Social Security check, it's been checked. It's been spent. It's out in the currency. It's out in the world. Somebody has it. When the gold is revalued, whoever is holding that dollar, they'll have money. But if you spent your Social Security check, if you're living check to check, paycheck to paycheck, or not necessarily paycheck, but to say Social Security check to Social Security check, then the only way the federal government can issue more currency is by having more gold.
Yeah. I'm only saying that
and then
for
that's
people that they're just retired, and all of a sudden we change everything, and they've been getting Social Security checks all this time. You mean to tell me we just leave them destitute?
that they'd have to work that out, but in theory that's what would happen, Fred. And let's not forget we have $38 trillion in debt too.
But
So-
that same thing would also eliminate all these that same law that you're talking about. Wouldn't that eliminate all these 3-letter organizations that don't exist in the Constitution?
Well, what would happen is that, because we don't have more gold to put into the system, because we don't have the gold mines to produce that much gold at this point, maybe we could develop them and so on and so forth, because the idea is that it takes work to make money. That's the ethical, biblical, constitutional way.
Right.
We've gotten into the habit of just printing money. Press a key on the keyboard and you print some money. That's a whole lot easier, Fred. It's
I agree with you, but this is why I agree with the tariffs idea. Then if we're going to go back to, if they're going 100% to the gold standard and everything that you currently have in Social Security is wiped out, at least we can get money from other countries to help support our country.
Well, and in that sense, you're absolutely right, Fred, because the way this country was founded is that the federal government would only operate underneath like tariffs, excise taxes, a few basic things like that. So if we look at the tariffs right now, for example, what was brought in 2025 as of the close of December 31st, and granted that wasn't for the full year, so you could, there'd be a little bit more on it to it. So our federal budget right now is roughly $7.5 trillion. The tariffs brought in 200 billion.
Right.
Okay, I could probably do the math here, but let's see, if it was $1 trillion, that would be 20%. Okay, so the tariffs brought in basically maybe 1 or 2% of what the federal government spends. So if we went to funding the federal government off of tariffs, the federal government would shrink 98%. Rough numbers, give me a little slack there. I'm trying to do some big numbers in my head here. I would be all for that.
It would go back to small government the way it was supposed to be.
But in with that, you would have Social Security completely eliminated. You'd have the entire welfare, whether there's good aspects or bad aspects, it would be completely eliminated. Most of the defense budget, our defense budget right now is 1 trillion. Trump's proposing 1.5 trillion. If our entire federal government is only 200 billion, then I'm going to say the defense would have to drop to 100 billion. So yeah, I'm all in favor of doing something like that. It would be
but at the same time, they should eliminate all the salaries of everybody. Everybody should be doing it for love of country. All the politicians, just like Trump is working for $1, everybody else should work for nothing.
Well, okay, so
I know what you're saying, but that's the bottom line.
You can't expect people to do work without getting paid. They have bills to pay. They got children to feed. And as for Trump, he made $3.5 billion last year, so he's not.
That's on the side of his own personal business. I'm talking about salary from the U.S. from the United States. We the people.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let me weigh in on that part.
We get upset when Nancy Pelosi makes $6 million from being in Congress.
That's because she runs the poorest district in California. She shouldn't be paid jack.
Yeah, well, maybe we should be upset if a politician makes $3.5 billion too.
Not if that's his own personal business.
Then we should be upset with Nancy.
Yes, we should. Because
she got it through insider trading. Let's face it.
Yeah,
but
there's ample evidence of that same thing happening with the other person. So
let me make a point here, and then I'm going to put up a comment Tom made. I would be in favor of, and I think it's 100% doable, that when Congress first started back, at the onset of this country, when the first Congress got seated, it was with the idea that they would be citizen legislators, that they would do their work, they have their businesses, have their farms,
right,
and then go to Washington, D.C. to do the nation's business. And when that was done, they went back and they earned their income through whatever livelihood they had back home. And, perhaps they were paid, I don't know, perhaps they were paid a per diem, amount while they were sitting in Washington because they couldn't be back at their farm or their retail business or whatever it was.
Right.
But, I'm not saying they should work for nothing, but darn it, politician should not be the most lucrative career path that you can have in this country.
Exactly.
So, but let me put this up, Tom. He says, explain this, and then I'll let you read it yourself. It only took a signature to take gold away, to get us off the gold standard, and then devalued the paper money. So why can't they reverse that? What was done by Nixon administration, blah, blah. What, any comment on that?
Well, basically, he says, it only took a signature to take it away. And what we just talked about is only takes a signature to put it back. We just need someone that has the courage to do that. Someone
if Trump did that today, you'd have a mile of protesters.
Then we choose not to be constitutionalists.
I agree with you. I want it to be constitutional, but there's a lot that needs to happen. That's the reason why he said a moral and just society to keep the Constitution running, because everybody who's sitting in the Congress and the House are getting rich off the American back.
Yeah. So we really come down to the question, based on what you just said, Fred, does America really want the Constitution? Because to do it would cause pain. And my vote, my thought at this point is, America, based on what you just said, there'd be a mile long of protesters. The American people will not stand for the Constitution at this point. They don't.
I think they would, but the problem is,
you just said the problem
is nobody wants to do it. That's the bottom line. These people are getting so comfortable with getting stuff free that's not free, but they don't do anything.
So what we're saying is that the republic will not be restored.
No. Because the ones of us who want it restored, they're calling us Nazis.
Well, I'm just saying, in the big picture, if it only takes a signature, or just simply go back to the Constitution and say, we wish to restore the republic, and we need to go back to sound money. As Tom said, people are living paycheck to paycheck. They can't afford stuff anymore because we have gotten off the Constitution. Right. Okay, so people are going to suffer. And they're going to suffer probably a lot worse if we don't go back to the Constitution.
Right.
But they don't realize that because they still think the national credit card is going to last forever.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let me weigh in on
this the right way. There's that. Sorry, Jim. Let me just. There's a
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
There's a song out in Christianity. It says, "Every knee shall bow one day before the Lord."
Oh yeah.
It is best for those who choose to bow today. Because you don't want to be on judgment day when you realize you're on the wrong side of the fence, so you got to bow. So it's better to choose him today. One day, this is all going to come down. It would be best if we chose the right way today.
Right.
Okay. Let me, and I understand what you're saying. I agree 100%. You and I have talked Constitution since we started this podcast, but I don't think, and this is listening to what you were saying, it's not just an issue of bringing money back to making it constitutional. It has to be an entire, bringing the entire country back to the Constitution. So in other words, if you really did enforce the 10th Amendment and get rid of all the government agencies that are unconstitutional and therefore didn't have to pay those people and didn't have to support those agencies and so on and so forth. And, you brought it back to, you'd probably shrink the federal budget by, I've heard some say 90%. Okay.
Jim, I just said 98% based on running it off of tariffs.
Right. So in other words, it's just not enough to do the money part. You also, at the same time, have to get rid of all the other unconstitutional things going on and bring it in again with the 10th Amendment, anything that's not specifically, written in that first 3 articles of the Constitution that go, or, that say what the federal government's responsible for, then get rid of it and send it back to the states or the local, the people, it says. So if you did that, if you, like you said, 7 seconds to sign your signature to get us back to the gold standard, and then got rid of all the other agencies that are unconstitutional. And I'll even go along, with the IRS. The IRS was created with an act of Congress. I mean, I realize there was an amendment that said you had to pay income tax, but they formed the IRS afterwards to be the enforcement arm of the federal government to take your money away from you. So you would almost have to do it all at one time to make
and
it
as
work.
much as we want this to happen, you have to get judges back to be judges that decide by law and by the Constitution instead of by their political party. And right now you got a lot of corrupt judges.
So the bottom line is it's up to the American people to decide what they want. My bet is that they're not going to choose the Constitution because they don't want to go through the pain. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it's a group decision, and I don't. Fred, you mentioned it earlier too, and I think it's very relevant. You said it's for just and moral people. Fundamentally, the Constitution is only for just and moral people. If the people are no longer just and moral, then what the people will get is tyranny, and what we have seen, and it continues, is that as we go down this road of not being a just and moral people, and at discerning times we shared an image of a police officer in 1980, and one's from like 2025, and I was down to just like at a local convenience store here the other day, sitting there doing some stuff and talking with some people, and a police officer walked in, and he matched the picture of 2025. So what was the picture? 1980 was a police officer in a blue collared shirt, maybe with a pistol on his side, with a nice gold badge on his shirt type of thing. That was it. Today, the police officer has body armor on, clubs, guns, you name it. They look pretty similar to a soldier at this point. So the American people, unfortunately, as we have gone from a just and moral society to something less, and probably far less than that, we are getting exactly what the Constitution said we'd get. We're going towards tyranny, and that is, that's very sad, because the day will come, if we don't reverse this trend, the day will come when we will see police officers like this, military, National Guard, whatever, on the corners of a lot of streets. Right. Jesse Ventura, the independent, a wrestler, governor of Minnesota, he ran for the reform. He ran with the Reform Party, which I don't know much about, but he doesn't really like either side either. He's kind of an independent person. He said, I was in the Philippines when Marcos, this was back in the 80s, he was a Navy SEAL person. I was in the Philippines when they declared martial law. And one day you went from being able to walk up and down the street normally, and the next day there was a soldier with a machine gun at every corner. Right. He goes, we don't want this country to get to that point. Right. But if we are no longer moral and just, that is exactly what we will get. And maybe that's what I don't want to say deserve, but that's what we're choosing.
Yeah, that's the problem. See, first thing you got to do is change the mindset of people. That's why I say we have to crawl before we walk. This is not something that's going to happen at once. Once you start to change people's mindset to where we need to be, then you can start enforcing it. But if you tried to do it all at once, you would have total anarchy on the streets, because people mind can't adjust to that. That's why I said we have to crawl before we walk. We have to start going in that direction, but we got to do it in a way that it doesn't make everybody absolutely lose their mind. And that's what I'm saying. You got to crawl before you walk. And once we start changing people's mindset, then you can make things happen. But if you try to do it all at once, you're talking total anarchy, and that's exactly what these other people want and other countries want. Because once we start fighting on the inside, is when they're going to hit us from the outside. And that's what they want.
Fred, the question becomes, can we crawl before we walk and get to the point of walking before the dollar collapses? Because when the dollar collapses, you will have your anarchy.
But if you start moving toward that direction, you can start changing the mindset of people, because people are starting to see what's going on in the country, because a lot of it's being uncovered thanks to little YouTubers like that guy uncovering a fraud in Minnesota. The thing is, it's going to take a little while to get there. And if you did it all at once, you would have anarchy, but that would play into the play card of what they want, because then America would be weak.
Well, and the question just becomes, do we have enough time before the dollar collapses?
And you don't want to show weakness to the world. If you show weakness to the world, and unfortunately, we live in a generation of people that don't believe in discipline, don't believe in tough sacrifices to get where you want to be. People that won't sacrifice anything. They just want happiness now, and they don't want to change.
Yeah. We've been conditioned for that.
And discipline, unfortunately, is a way to produce good fruit.
Yeah, all these are good points. We really got off the topic of money and economy here right now, and really shifted to the Constitution. No, that's all right. I mean, it's a good discussion. I don't think because that John Adams quote that you gave, that the Constitution was made only for a moral and just people, and I can't remember the exact quote, but to everybody else, it's basically worthless. And I would suggest that we do not live under a constitutional republic anymore. We just don't. The Constitution has been thrown out the window by every shady thing that the Congress and the government has done almost since it was ratified. I mean, there was debates going on and still in the late 1700s, 1800s about all this. Right. So it's a huge problem, and I don't know. I honestly don't know if we can ever get back to being a constitutional republic without another revolution. And I don't say that lightly, because nobody wants to see that. In tying it back to the economy, I don't think we can bring back our economy to be constitutional. In other words, our money to be constitutional without, as you said, Jim, without a lot of pain. And people don't want the pain. And I said it before in our podcast, is that if we went back to constitutional money, gold and silver, and even if you manipulated the price of gold to match the current money supply, then I just don't see how that would work. And what I think would happen is a lot of these paper millionaires, there's probably more millionaires today than there has ever been in the history of this country, but it's on paper, stocks, bonds, and so on and so forth. And if you corrected, and I'll use the word corrected, if you corrected our monetary system to act constitutionally, a lot of that wealth would evaporate. And that's just my opinion. I don't see it happening anywhere else, because we've inflated. In other words, we've taken Jim, you've made the point before where you could buy, gasoline is still worth, we only pay 3 silver dimes for a gallon of gasoline. Okay. Well, there is that from 30 cents to $3 and some. There's a lot of whole smoke and mirror money out there.
Right.
I'd probably have to do the calculation, Jim, but those 3 dimes at current value could probably not buy you 1 gallon of gasoline like they did in 1964, but could probably buy 3 or 4 at this point.
Yeah, I did the math on that. I actually literally weighed 3 dimes on my postage scale to figure out what the weight of 3 dimes was, and then took 90, because they were 90% pre-64 dimes were 90% silver, correct? So basically, you can take
I'm
that
going to a
weight.
site right now called Correlation. I'm going to look it up for you. Exactly.
Okay.
So one 1964 dime is now worth $6.83. $6
For the value of the silver.
3 of those dimes would be worth. Yeah. So 3 of those dimes is now worth $20.49. A gallon of gasoline is what, about $3.39?
Yeah, something
329?
like that.
In the blue states.
Okay, so we'll take 339, or I got 329. I typed it in. So you can buy 6.22 gallons of gasoline now with those same 1964 dimes. The American people have been deceived. Our founding fathers were very smart, and they knew, because the colonies went through hyperinflation, because to pay for the Revolutionary War they printed money, and so the colonies had hyperinflation. So in 1989 they instituted gold and silver only. They were very smart. We have forgotten the lesson, and we too shall pay the price. We are.
So going back to we got off on this talking about the Federal Reserve, and I bring it back to the question: can we? Because again, John Birch Society, James Roguski, other people across the country, they're all saying end the Fed, end the Fed, end the Fed. Could we, in your opinion, and I realize these are opinions, and you know what they say about opinions, they're like, never mind, I won't go down that road. But in your opinion, is it feasible that we ever ended the Federal Reserve and went back to the U.S. Treasury controlling the money and having the money be based on gold and silver? Biblical, constitutional money.
So from an internal perspective, no. From an external perspective, possibly.
What do you mean?
Okay, so our own Congress, the president, the judicial system, they're not going to do it. They're just not. We know that. For the reasons that we just talked here, because it'll cause too much pain, and they won't do it because if the people suffer, they won't get reelected, so on and so forth. However, the BRIC nations, and we've talked about this for years, Jim, they just announced the unit, in quotes there. The latest plan apparently is to back it 40% gold and 60% with the founding country's currencies. If and I know your second topic is on gold and silver. So gold and you mentioned in some post or something in the past about Basel III. The Basel III banking agreement, which is now effective, and there's different levels to it, says that banks can now hold gold on their balance sheets at fair market value, whereas before they could only hold it on the balance sheet at 50% value. So there was a rigging going on there in a very big way. So we have countries, we have the international banking system. They're all going back to some sort of a gold standard. That's going to come back on us at some point, okay? Because the day's going to come when, say, another country says, if you want our products, you're going to have to pay for it in something other than U.S. dollars, because we don't like the U.S. dollar anymore. We want gold, silver, oil, land, something that is a tangible asset. This is where the world is moving to. Now, the United States can choose to go back to biblical constitutional money, or they can choose not to and have to and live within this new paradigm, which will kind of be imposed on them to some degree. So will it happen internally, James? No, absolutely not. Our politicians will never do it. Will it happen because of an external force? That's looking more and more likely every single day for those that follow the markets, and in particular watch like the economic headlines yesterday. So that's where things are heading. It would be best if we chose it now voluntarily.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because the Federal Reserve does not operate in a vacuum. It is part of basically a global central banking system. All right. The Federal Reserve just happens to be, quote unquote, our piece of the corrupt pie. Okay. But it goes back to central banks across the globe that are controlling all the money of the world. I mean, Let's face it, you can say all you want about BRICS nations and this and that, but it's still the central bankers and the money people that are calling the shots.
Okay. Well, I know that's absolutely true. And, we have the Davos meetings going on right now. And I'm not supporting the World Economic Forum or anything else like that, but those people are the ones that do call the shots. Us average little people really don't, which is why we really need to hold our leaders accountable to following the law, which we don't. But, the central bankers, it's interesting. For the first time in decades, the central bank's number one reserve asset is gold. The US dollar no longer is. So, whether you like them or not, ironically, the central bankers, and if you take, for example, like China and India, who are non-Christian, for example, they are all recognizing the importance of gold and silver. We in the West, for whatever reason, refuse to recognize that.
What we need to recognize is the power of oil right now, because that's the reason why the whole stink is happening in Venezuela in the first place. Where does China get 80% of their oil?
China gets 4% of their oil from Venezuela.
More than that.
No, it's about 4%.
Yeah, I think it's more than that. I think the numbers that they quoted on the other were a lot higher than 4%. But that's okay.
What?
They get most of their oil from.
You did say oil was a commodity.
They get most of their oil from
the oil,
the Middle East.
and we're in good shape. That's a valuable thing too. Oil, just like you said gold, oil, or whatever minerals. Yeah. Oil is a commodity.
So the thing about the Venezuela oil, and it's interesting since you brought it up, in that Venezuela has underground more oil reserves than any other nation on the planet.
Right. Exactly.
However, their oil is also like the worst quality.
But we can refine it.
So you have to refine it, but it takes a lot more money to refine it. It's a more complicated process. So nations like anyone would, you're going to take the easier route. If you have easy oil to refine, you're going to go there before you get the hard oil to refine. So they get most of the oil from the Middle East, Iran being one of those nations. So, and they get a lot of oil from Russia now. So that's their primary stuff. Venezuela, they got some oil. They got like 4%, even say 5%, something like that. Mm-hmm. It's also worth noting that China has been stockpiling oil dramatically in recent years. They've been stockpiling a lot of resources dramatically in recent years. So one could say they know what is coming and they are preparing for it. And,
Go ahead.
And that's what you kind of see around. I mean, part of this whole taking Venezuela and whatever else, it's a resource grab. We're trying to get everyone right now. If you look at the markets and you look at world events, everyone is trying to get resources, as much resources as they can before the war hits.
That's what you're going to need when it hits the fan. You're going to need the resources when it hits the fan.
But I, in our Discerning the Times class, we mentioned this one will be nuclear. So we better.
Well, with nuclear, there are no survivors.
Well, and that's why we better tell our officials and ourselves to calm down on the emotions and start thinking through. Like, what was it? Sting had the song in the 1980s. I hope the Russians love their children too. Mm-hmm. We better start thinking about that, because if we don't, we won't have anything to leave to our children. And we will have to answer to God for our actions. And at that point, if there are mushroom clouds over dozens of cities around the world, including our own, I don't think anyone's going to be asking, we were right or we were wrong. I think they'll be asking, where am I going to get food to feed my children tonight?
Yeah, but we're at a point that we have weaponry that's going to end all life. So you better make sure your heart's right before you worry about all the money. Because if nukes are dropped, you better hope your heart's right.
Yeah. That's why I said we need to calm things down. We need to get our hearts right and stop escalating with emotions and start thinking about, what are we really talking about here? We need to care about our children. We need to care about things, and the Constitution is biblical, is Christianity. And so when I hear, when we don't want to go there, what are we saying? As a nation, we have rejected God.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
What do you mean?
As a nation.
Okay,
what
so
I'm saying is it's more important what your children are learning.
Okay, so I segue to a different topic there a little bit, but in terms of the constitutional talk, keep in mind that document was written by the vast majority of the people being Christians and all of them living in a very much a Christian society. So
Right.
Christianity greatly influenced that document.
Exactly.
If we, so one could say, if we are Christian, then we like the document. If we're not, maybe, or if we don't like the, so on the reverse end, if we don't like the Constitution, maybe we're not Christian. I don't know, but we're not following Christian principles. So would people say we can't go back to the Constitution, or we don't want to go back to the Constitution, or be too tough to go back to the Constitution? I would say that at some level, we're beginning to undermine what God asks of us. God asks for just weights and measures. That's what gold and silver does. So if we're still going to stick on the printing press, that is not a just weight and measure, and we're kind of giving God the middle finger. And so that's one of the reasons why we, like the gold and silver is so important, but so many other aspects of the Constitution is, because because the Constitution actually allows us to live out our faith. Right. And so if we're saying no to the Constitution, we're saying no to like gold and silver, in this case, we're talking a lot about, we're saying no to our faith. We're all talking and we're not walking our talk.
Right. Well, bottom line is we definitely got a big problem on our hands, but the bottom line is we can't give up on God. The God factor changes everything. God can change the heart of any man, and he would. So we just can't leave out that God factor.
I just said that. Yes, we're in agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's hard to say the majority, because I think if you did a poll, the majority of people would say they were faithful. I don't know what the majority might be, 50.5%, but it would say they're faithful. They would, whether they say they're Christians or not, or whether they go to church or not, they would say, but I would say actions speak louder than words. I think it comes down to acting out your faith, demanding the same from your representatives. And if they don't adhere to that, then we're supposed to have a system to get rid of them through the voting booth. Although I am more and more convinced that until we get rid of the corruption in our voting system, it is irrelevant to cast a vote, because it's already a selection process. But that's going down a whole nother road that I don't want to take us on today.
Right.
But in other words, I don't think, I'm not sure we can vote our way out of this anymore. And that's why I keep saying, to get us back to a constitutional republic is going to have to take some kind of a revolution, whether it's a bloody revolution or whether it's a coup, whether it's whatever it is. We need to get rid of the corruption that has got us to this point and get us back to a biblical, constitutional way of living. And are people willing to go along with that? Probably not. But I think we can go round and round here and debate how to get there. But I think we all agree that the end result is that we have to get back to God. We got to get back to a biblical foundation for our country.
Absolutely.
And is that possible? I don't know. I'm not God. I don't see the future. I don't know. I have hope for our younger generation. I've been, my grandkids are coming up anywhere from, in their late teens to early 20s to my oldest grandson is 28. And I see them going back to conservative, believe it or not, a lot of them anyway, are going back to conservative values. Maybe they're going to be the ones that say, hey, enough is enough. I don't know. Will we last long enough for them to get old enough to be, part of the solution? I hope so. But we got off the subject. Hey, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Jim. If you can hang on a little bit past 10 o'clock, what I'll do is the reason we have a hard break at 10 is that we have our Bradford TV channel and we have X that will cut off at 10 o'clock exactly. I mean, it's just it'll stop and we'll go. So about a couple minutes to 10, I'll sign off those two channels, with just some verbiage here, but we can keep the podcast going because we haven't even touched silver and gold.
Yeah.
And then
well, unfortunately, Jim, I have other commitments right after 10 o'clock. So
all right. So we can't do that.
Because you mentioned the hard cutoff. So
all right. Not a problem. I understand completely. I was just going to, since we really went down rabbit holes here, I just thought I'd give us that opportunity to do that, but I certainly understand. No problem.
Well, if I was to do a closing statement, because I can see we're at like 53 minutes almost here. We didn't really talk about economics right here. So I'll just preface this, which is kind of what I summed up at Discerning the Times, and folks can always check that out if they wish. The system, Jim, we talked about it for years. The system is cracking in very, very, very big ways right now. If you're following the financial news, you know what's going on. There are huge tremors underneath the water, and the tsunami is getting closer. We know, based on that old phrase, James, from Gerald Celente, when all else fails, they take you to war, because the powers that ought not to be will never allow themselves to be blamed for the problems that they created. And that in this particular case, all the debt and everything else. So given that the system is breaking, it's no longer if or when, it's now. It's happening now. We can expect war on the horizon because they need to blame it on something. Given that our so-called representatives are consistently talking about war and nuclear war on a very regular basis, I would implore that, first off, as we mentioned so much here, that we all pray and fast for our leaders to remain calm, for unity to be restored, for we as a people to come together, because if we don't tone this down now, there will be mushroom clouds above American cities and other cities around the world in the not too distant future. They have been talking about nuclear war for 3 years. The talking is coming to an end. So that would be my closing thoughts on that seriously, go before the Lord, pray and fast, because some very wicked things are happening and are coming. And if you're not following news, then you're oblivious to all this. Ignorance is bliss, as they say. But if you're following news, you know what is going on, and you know some of the stuff that just happened yesterday. It was shocking. But most people don't know, and so they don't care, and so they're walking around in bliss. And when it happens, they will shake their heads and say, "What happened?" And our so-called representatives will say, "Everything was going just fine, and then this happened. And now we have to do X, Y, and Z." And I can, based on our conversation, I can virtually guarantee you that restoration of the Constitution will not happen, and we will have tyranny.
Well, I'll tell you what, if what you're talking about, nuclear war, happens, constitutional money will be the least of our worries.
Oh, will be the least of our
survival will be our main priority.
Right.
Jim, God help us if we get to that point.
You know what? Some people will survive. and it does at least give you in another position. People go on after Nazi Germany. Some of the Germans they took action. People that saw the Great Depression coming, they took some action. They were able to help at least. If you're at the, if a nuclear bomb drops, then frankly, I hope I'm at the bottom of it. I'll catch it. If I have done what the Lord has called me to do, then let me catch the bomb, and I can go off to eternity. If I still have something left to do with my life, then keep me healthy and give me the resources to bless others.
Okay, we're running out of time. If you want prayer,
it's 9:59. We're going to get cut off in a second here.
Okay. I see 56 minutes.
So Fred, why don't you pray us out of here? We can stay, we can stay on for a minute. But go ahead.
Thank you, Lord. I ask, Lord, that you would bring clarity to your people, Lord. I ask that you would bring the darkness to the light, Lord, and people would begin to seek you for vision and you for understanding, Lord, that you would guide your people to, even no matter how corrupt the world is, there's a remnant of people that are very close to you. Lord, I ask that you would make those people come up, stand up, and that we could change what's going on today. I don't believe in complete loss. I believe that you're in control and you're in control of our future. So we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And I still stand on 2 Chronicles 7:14. So
that's right.
I know we lost our X followers and our Bradford TV followers, but we can wrap this up here too. So Jim, like I say, we were going to talk about money today, and it really didn't work out. But this was a good discussion anyway. Something that we probably had to discuss, the
fundamental points were conveyed.
I'm kind of with you. If I used to think I wanted to build some kind of a bunker on some property that we have out in the woods, and I've changed my mind on that. If what you describe happens, I don't want to come out of that bunker and see what the aftermath is. So let's pray to God it does not happen.
Right.
Because if it does, maybe that is the beginning of the end. Who knows? Maybe it's time to go back to the Lord. I don't know.
I think God's in control of all that. Sometimes I visualize that. I mean, this is off subject. Sometimes I think that the lake of fire one day will be nuclear war, ending everything. But hey, look at it however you want.
Yeah. Harold asked how to find Bradford TV. Let me give that. You go to basically OBBM. That's O-B as in boy, B-M as in Mike. OBBM network.tv. So the OBBM network is one word, and I'm going to go to it right here, and I'll do a screen share. But when you go to it, let me do a screen share here for those that are still on, and we'll find it here. Share. Okay, so OBBM Network TV. You can go up here. There's a menu. You go to cities, and it'll show you all the cities that are part of this network. And I can actually do a search for Bradford. So do a search for Bradford there. Oops, I hit donate instead of search. Sorry about that. Bradford search. And you'll see this is Bradford. Well, Bradford TV.
Mm-hmm.
Right here, Bradford PA TV.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see this is our channel. We've got Patriot Pulse podcast. We've got other things on here. We've got this is Veronica Kemeny that was our guest last week. She's on there now. And coming soon, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Jim, but I'm going to. Coming soon will be a series on here for Jim. I'm not sure where you're going to be, but in which one of these, maybe we'll give you a series of your category of your own. But Jim will be on here talking about all things Constitution. So you find us by going to obbmnetwork.tv and then search for Bradford. You'll find us on there. And you can do that. So it's 10 after 3. We've already lost 2 of our platforms, but Jim, I appreciate you coming on as always. You know, this third Wednesday of the month, I enjoy this because we get a chance to talk about money, which I try to avoid the rest of the time because I'm not an expert on it. And not only that, it gives us a chance to get back to the beginning of our podcast when we had you on all the time. So missed that. So anyways, let's remember that Second Chronicles 7:14, where it says, and this is God talking through his prophet, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. I think that's what every God-fearing Christian in this country should be praying every day.
Exactly.
Because you notice it says, if my people who are called by my name, it doesn't say every person on earth. It doesn't say every person in the United States. It doesn't say every person that has breath. It says, if my people who are called by my name will do this. So maybe it's just going to take us as Christians, as true Bible believing Christians, to do this, to make a difference in the world.
Yeah,
maybe.
If you look at the way the enemy,
I'm a hopeless. Yeah, I'm a hopeless optimist.
Me too.
All right. Well,
if you just look at the way the enemy penetrated God's people, he always used deception. And if he couldn't get you from the outside, he got you from the inside.
Yeah. Jim, I know you got another commitment here, so we'll let you go for today. And any last before I say goodbye, last comment?
I already said it.
All right.
Well, I'll end it with this here. Stay close to the Lord because he can make a way where there appears to be no way.
There's a song about that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All righty. Well, appreciate everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thank you that joined us online. And don't forget, wherever you are, it's colder than blazes. Well, colder than I won't say what it is, but it's really cold here.
Very cold.
Regardless of where you are, be blessed
And be a blessing to others.
And I see Jim already dropped off the screen. So have a good day, everybody. We'll see you next week.